Hi. This week I'm going to be talking about basic modeling in Blender. Now I don't know about you, but I started my Blender journey about a year ago. And when I started, I watched a lot of YouTube videos on watching people make a lot of different models in Blender. And I watched them using all these shortcut keys, and some explained them, some did not. But it moved pretty fast, and frankly, I was very frustrated because I would watch people make a model and then I would try to reproduce it myself, and I would seemingly do exactly what they were doing, but mine would not work. And I would spend a lot of time trying to figure out why is theirs working and mine not. So I finally figured out a lot of those modeling tricks, and so what I'm doing is putting together this video kind of covering all of the pieces that I feel are important when creating, using Blender to create models to export to games. Now this is focused on creating game assets, mainly more low poly game assets, and not focusing on the more artistic areas of Blender. The fact is Blender is a very big program, very well put together, but it does a lot of different things. And a lot of those things apply to other situations. I actually use Blender to edit all the videos that I'm posting on YouTube. So it does video editing. It does a lot of very complex materials and creating models that are up to photorealistic. But I'm focused on using Blender to create low poly models for export into Unity for creating games. So, why don't we get started and put our game programming glasses on and get modeling in Blender. All right, so we're starting in Blender with our default cube, and it's selected, and we are in object mode. That means we're operating on the whole object. First, we need to tab. Tab will switch between object mode and edit mode. Very common to switch between. So on my original videos, I did some basic commands like extrude, E for extrude. It will grab a face and create and extend your 3D object. S for scale. So if I have a face selected, I will scale, and pay attention to where your cursor is when you go to scale. Hitting Ctrl Z will undo. So if my cursor is very close to the center point and I hit scale, see, it's very sensitive. So I always forget that when I am going to scale something. So right click just exits out without accepting the command. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to Control Z, I'm going to extrude this a little bit further. And a very common thing to do is to create loop cuts. So if I hit Control R, oops, just shifted my 3D cursor there, which I did not want. Go over 3D cursors in a minute. So I'm going to go into select mode. I'm going to select this, hit Alt R. It's actually Control R. And I always get confused between Alt R and Control R for doing loop cuts. So Control R does loop cuts. And you'll notice that when I move, it will toggle between which direction I want my cut, and I want it along the long way of my cube. And if I scroll up and down with my mouse wheel, I will add more or less cuts. So I'm going to add a bunch here. I'm going to left click, and now I can move them if I want, but I don't want to do that. So I will just right click to cancel out of that, and I will left click my mouse. So I have now created a lot more faces. So now one thing is it's automatically switched to edge select mode. You'll notice that, so we have to hit 3. Now 1, 2, and 3 switches between what it is I want to select. So if I hit 1, it's going to select vertices. 2, it's going to select edges. 3, it's going to select faces. And you can click these little icons up here to do that if you don't want to do the shortcut commands, but you're switching between them a lot. So doing the shortcut commands is very useful. So another useful thing once I have loops is to select the whole loop. And this took me quite a while to figure out which loop it's going to select. So if I hold down Alt key, and you'll see at the bottom it shows loop collect in that, or loop select in that lower left hand corner. And now if I click on a face, it selects this loop. But sometimes it will select the wrong loop. So if I just click there, why did it select that loop instead of the loop I wanted? And it took me a while to figure out, and if you don't notice this when people are clicking on things, is that when I clicked on the horizontal or vertical line here, it selected this loop. And if I selected closer to this line, it selected this loop. So a lot of times when I would try to do it, it would always select the wrong loop select, and I couldn't figure out why it was selecting one versus the other. But that is the one way that you can always select the correct one, is to select very close to the edge of the loop direction you want to select. Now another thing that's done a lot is inset. So if I select this face, I can inset the face and create a new face inside of the other one. And this is done a lot. I for inset. Again, I can also access inset along these icons on the left hand side, but it's again done a lot. So I'm going to Ctrl Z. So you'll notice that when I inset and move my cursor, it scaled the inset in and out. A lot of times I don't inset it right away. I do I for inset. I'll left click to accept the inset, and then I'll hit S for scale. And it really kind of does the same thing, except I have more options when scaling. So some of those options are I can scale and just scale. If I hit Y, it will only scale in the Y direction. If I hit S and hit X, it will only scale in the X direction. So that is a lot handier than just doing the I and resizing. So this is another tricky thing, is that the videos that I watch, a lot of times they'll do a loop select and they'll do I. Now when I hit I, you'll notice in the upper left hand corner there's a bunch of options, which it took me a while to notice. One of them is individual. And you'll notice right now individual is off. So if I left click to accept and now I scale, you'll notice it scales down this whole loop in my section like that, which is what I want. So if I undo all that, reselect this, hold down Alt, click to select my loop, hit I, but now I hit I again to do individual on, and now scale. You notice I get scaling like this because the inset it created was individual faces. So this I did a lot, and I never even noticed that there was a difference of whether individual was on or off. And this was frustrating because I would always get this instead of what I wanted. So when you do I, notice whether individual is on or off is very important to get what you're actually after. All right, so we did loop cuts, loop select, and inset. Extrude, scale, and inset. Now, why would I want to do insets? So let's look at the difference between creating an inset and scaling. So if I just hit scale without inset, or I actually have an inset there, so I'll select this face. If I hit scale, what it's doing is it's scaling the whole top of my object, which maybe that's what I want, and this is what I get. If I grab this, I'll hit grab, I'll filter on the Z axis by hitting Z, and then pull it up. You'll notice that it pulls up everything around it. You'll notice it didn't pull up I'm going to hit my middle mouse button and move to change my direction. You'll notice that this is flat and this is angled. The reason is because I inset this face. There is a separate face here. And if I grab that in the Z direction, it just pulls it straight up, kind of like what Extrude did. So depending if I inset first, then grab it or scale it, it will do differently than if I just grab a face, again grab that Z and pull it up. So I have different controls depending on what I want to do to my model. Maybe I want this, and so I can grab it and pull it up, or maybe I don't and I want to inset a face, then grab it and pull it up. So you'll notice I did some of those grab filters. Now you can also filter that by turning on a gizmo that shows the XYZ. I never do that simply because doing the shortcut keys is very, very handy. Again, what you have to remember is your mouse here cannot move in 3 dimensions. And Blender needs to know which dimension you actually want to move or grab your object in. So if I grab this, I hit G. If I hit X, it will just move it in the X direction. If I hit GY, it'll move it in the Y direction. If I hit GZ, it'll move it in the Z direction. If I just grab without one of those, I don't really know which direction I'm dragging in at all. So I usually always will grab and filter based on the XYZ depending on what I want. So that's very important to be able to know how to do. So let's talk about changing views. Right now I'm in just a general 3D view. I can change the view by hitting my middle mouse button and moving. If I hit my middle mouse button and hold down the Shift key, I'll actually pan around. So that's important to know. Holding down Shift and the middle mouse button pans around. Holding down the middle mouse button alone will change my view. But a lot of times when I'm editing, I want to change my view to top, front, or side view. And you can use this gizmo right here for doing that. But again, it's done a lot. And hitting the number pad is a very handy way of changing views, especially since you're doing a lot. So, and I can never remember these necessarily. And if you pick the wrong one, you can just hit another number to get what you want. But 3 does the side view, 7 does the top view, and 1 does the front view. Now, one thing to remember as I'm doing this, and this is kind of a symmetrical element, but if I grab one of these and extrude it, it's still going to be fairly symmetrical. But if I hit 3, if I hit 9, it's going to flip around from the other direction. Yeah, I guess you can tell the difference. So if I hit 9, it toggles it from, you would say, the right side looking at versus the left side. So that's handy too. So if I just hit my middle mouse button, I can change back to my 3D view. And the reason this is important is that now if I grab something, so say I grab this top, I select the top, I hit 3, and now when I grab it, you'll notice I can see a grid behind it. So if I zoom in, I can actually see exactly how many grid units I am extending that. And that can be very useful when trying to do something, especially if you're exporting it to Blender and you want to know the exact size. That's very handy to see this grid background and do the side view. And the same for the top view, that if I want to grab this. Now, since the face is facing me, top view isn't very useful for me here. But if I grab this face, hit 7 again, and now I can grab this. And again, I can move it. It's going to move it both in the X and Y direction. And if I hit X, I can limit it just to go in the X direction. So that's very handy. So another thing that I notice that people do is sometimes they add objects while in edit mode, and sometimes they add objects in object mode. And adding extra objects is important and used for several reasons. So if I'm in edit mode, I'll select this and I hit Shift A, and I'm going to add a cylinder just so we can tell the difference. And you'll notice it added the cylinder. And if we look in the upper right hand corner, we'll see this hierarchy. We see our camera, we see our cube, which is what it default names, and that's all we see. Our cylinder is part of this object. If I grab this in the X, I can move it over. Grab it in the Z, I can move it up. R is another element used a lot. So now if I hit 3 for side view and I hit R, I can rotate that. A very important thing when rotating, so if I left click, you'll notice that I get this little menu in the lower left hand corner that shows me the exact degrees I just rotated. And if I want exactly 90, I can left click here, type 90, hit return, and now it's rotated exactly 90 degrees. So now that the question is, I just want to select this cylinder. I want to select all the faces for this cylinder, not the cube. Well, how can I do that? Well, since it's a separate mesh, it's all within the same object. This is the object. This is what's called the mesh. If I hold my cursor over, and this I found confusing, the cylinder and hit the L key, it selects all the items in that individual mesh. And now I can grab this and I can do whatever I want with it. I can scale it in the Y direction to make it longer. If I hold the cursor over my cube and hit L, I have to deselect everything first. You'll notice it just selected my cube and not my cylinder. So that's a lot of times why you will add another mesh in edit mode. So if I hit tab and I'm in object mode, and now I hit Shift A to insert. Instead of Shift A, I could also go to this add menu. It just pops up this add menu. It's a shortcut. Again, done a lot. Shift A, add a cube. Now you'll notice in this upper right hand corner, I have a separate object, again called cube001. It's just a default name. But now it's an actual separate object. I can select this object. I can grab it on the X. I can grab this object, grab it on the Z. So I can operate them separately. And when exporting to Unity, it's important to know whether objects are separate or together. And so adding objects in object mode versus edit mode is very important. So when I added that object, how did it know where the object was added? So let's go back into edit mode. We'll select this. We'll hit tab to go into edit mode. Say I want to add another cylinder right in the middle of this cylinder. Well, when we add an object, it's going to use the 3D cursor. That's this thing right down there. And a very handy way is to change our 3D cursor to the exact position where we want to add our object. So I'm going to select the face. I want to add a cylinder right in the middle of this other cylinder. So I can hit Shift S, pops up this menu. And again, you can get this menu also from the icons up top. And I'll select Cursor to Selected. So what it did is it moved my 3D cursor right to the middle of this face. And now when I do Shift A and add a cylinder, it added that cylinder right in the middle of my other cylinder. And now I'll hit 3 to the side view. I'm going to rotate. I'm going to change this to exactly 90 here. Hit return. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it. I'm going to hit S for scale So now it scales it down. Now I can select just the front face and I can hit S down to a point. So now what I have is a cylinder inside of a cylinder. If I hit Shift C, it moves that 3D cursor back to the middle just to get it out of the way. Again, all of these selections on that menu you can also get through the object menu in the upper left hand corner. All right, so let's talk about parenting. So parenting is also important when exporting an item to Unity, because sometimes we want objects to be all part, we want meshes to be all part of the same object, but we want to move those objects independently. So you'll notice right now I have go back into object mode. I have two objects here, cube and cube 001, and I'm going to rename these. I'm going to select this cube, hit F2 to rename, and I'm going to type parent object. I'm going to select this guy here, hit F2, child object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this child object a child of this parent. So if I hold down Shift key and select both objects, you'll notice this one's highlighted in orange, this one's in yellow. I held down Ctrl P and it said set parent to object. So now what you'll notice is that this child is now underneath this parent object. So now when I select the parent and I grab it, you notice they both move together. And this is important because if I exported this to Unity, Unity is going to support that same parent-child relationship. And we use this in various situations when we're wanting to manipulate our objects in Unity. So knowing how to do and create a parent is important. So if I select this, the child object, and I hit, Control P, actually it's Alt P, I can actually clear the parent. So if I hit clear parent, now you notice that the child is no longer a child of the parent. And this is used quite a bit in various situations. So understanding parent-child relationships is important, how to create a parent of an object, and how to clear that parent are important functions to understand. So there's various commands you can do to select faces. So one very handy one is if I select this face and I want to select all the faces down this. I could hold Shift key and select them all individually, and that's kind of tedious. Or what I can do is select this and hit Control and plus on my numpad. And what it's going to do is it's going to keep selecting as I hit plus faces that are connected to the face I have selected, and keep going further and further down the more time I hit plus. If I hit minus, it will undo that. So that's a handy way of selecting faces. So another thing people do is that they will make a copy of a face and separate it from the mesh that it was part of. So if I hit Shift D right now, it's going to copy the face I have selected. Now if I hit G for grab along the Y axis, Oops. Did I not hit G? Add duplicate. Yep. You'll notice that it grabbed that face and separated it. Now if I extrude it, I have another cube mesh that's again part of this other mesh. So that's done a lot if I don't want to do a change 3D cursor and then do Shift A to add another object. It's a handy way of just getting a object that I want separated. And I might want to do that because maybe if I just hit this, I hit L to select all. I'm going to scale it down. I'm going to scale it in the Y direction. I'm going to grab it in the Y direction. I can kind of inset it there inside of my other face if that's what I want to do. Scale this down in order to, it gives me another option for how I want to put together my 3D model. So that's done quite a bit. So I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this object, go back into object mode, hit X for delete. Why they don't use delete, I don't know. They use X, delete, X, delete, Shift A, create my mesh, add my cube back. Auto mirror is used quite a bit. I'm going to scale this up. And you'll notice that up in this upper right hand corner, I have a menus. Now, when you first start, this menu is collapsed. So this little icon there, if you click on that, it will pop out that menu. A lot of times what people use is N to make that menu appear and not appear. But if you can't remember the N, you can always hit that little icon. So what I'm going to do is turn auto mirror on. And what that does is it will split the item in half, and everything I do on this half, it's going to duplicate on that half. And a lot of times when I'm modeling, I want my object to be symmetrical. You'll notice that we have this modifier over here, this auto mirror modifier that just got turned on. And it's showing because I selected this little wrench icon. So you got lots of little icons over here that allow me to see different properties of my object. If I hit the little wrench, it's going to show my modifiers. And auto mirror turns on the mirror modifier by default, and it splits my object in half. So now when I select this object, say, and extrude it, see it's going to duplicate everything I do on one side to the other side, which can be very handy when making objects that you want symmetrical. So the question is, how do I turn auto mirror off? Clicking auto mirror again does not turn it off. What you do is you can come over if you select on the little wrench icon, and if I'm in object mode, I can select this drop down next to the camera and say apply. So now you'll notice that my auto mirror is off because I've applied the modifier, and you notice it disappeared. It's just going to hit Ctrl Z a couple times to undo that, back into edit mode. So one thing that's very important when you're in auto mirror is do not do anything that's going to create a face that crosses this Y boundary, because weird things will happen. So if I say, I grab that face, I'm going to inset it, I'm going to scale it a bit, I'm going to extrude it. So now you'll notice that it extruded one on each side, which is exactly what I wanted. If I hit scale now, what's happening is it's crossing the boundary, and it creates an odd situation with the faces when I do that. The other thing that I have to be careful of is if I do Shift A now and I add a cylinder, see it's crossing the boundary, it will make an odd set of faces And I just generally don't want to do that because it's like duplicating this right on top of each other, and you don't see it, but it actually can create some odd situations if you're not careful. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's just something that you should avoid if auto mirror is on, is creating objects or creating anything that crosses that boundary. In this case, it seems to be working okay. I've run into lots of cases where it does not and creates duplicate faces that I end up having to try to clear up by hand. Now you notice these modifiers. This mirror modifier is probably the most typical one. There's lots and lots of modifiers. I can select any one of my, generally you do it through a whole object and add modifiers. One other, well, I'm not going to go through the modifiers. Modifiers can be pretty complicated. If you're first starting out, it's best just to avoid it. You can use your auto mirror. The only time you want to mess with this is if you want to get auto mirror off. It's handy to do that apply. Using proportional editing. Let's just going to get rid of this again. Shift A, add my cube back. I'm going to scale in the Y direction to make it really long. Into edit mode. Add a bunch of loop cuts. I'm going to go into edit face mode. I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to select this face. And if I scale it now, you'll notice it just scales that face. But if I want to actually scale so it scales all the faces to kind of be make a more proportional curve of all these faces, I can come up here and you'll notice that there's this little drop down here and I can change my proportional editing. And if I select this little circle button to turn proportional editing on, now when I scale, I hit S to scale, I see this circle. This is going to tell me what I want to affect when I proportionally scale. And if I hit my, again, I'm going to use my middle mouse button and use my wheel to scale up. Now all of the vertices and faces within that circle are going to be affected. And now you notice that it did a smooth scaling up of all the affected items. And if I keep doing this up, I can expand that circle or decrease the circle. This is very handy if you want to get some smooth curves, and especially if I want to, I'll just scale this in the X direction. See, now you get a nice ballooning out of my scale by using proportional editing. So that's very handy to turn on and off. So now that I have this, I'll use an example. If I grab this face and I extrude it, you'll notice it's now at an angle that's not square up with any of my X, Y, or Z. And it's difficult to work with items in this case. But what if I want to square this up? I want all of these points to be flat according to the Y axis. What I can do is I can use snap to square up this face, which can be very handy. I'm going to hit 1, and now I can select each individual vertice when I'm in 1. If I go to this menu up here, I can see my snap options. So I can snap to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap to vertex. I'm going to snap to the closest one. And I am going to turn, instead of turning snap on, because when you turn snap on, it can be very clumsy. And I'm not going to turn snap on. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this vertice, and I'm going to grab it but I only want to grab it in the X direction. I'm going to grab it, filter on X. So now I'm only moving in the X direction. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Ctrl key, which turns snap on, and I'm going to move to this vertice. So now what it did is it moved in the X direction, but it snapped to use the X value of the vertex I was over. And you'll see the little yellow circle, and I'll hit my left mouse button, select this guy, grab, filter on X, hold down Control, hold over that guy. So now basically what it's done is it's moved these two vertices to align along that X coordinate with the two vertices on top. So now basically this face is now parallel along that y-axis. So now if I go to 3, select the face, I can now extrude it, and it is parallel to that face. So I've used that a lot when creating things, and you'll notice that I don't know if they're aligned perfectly. It looks like this is a little narrower. Go back to 1, select, grab now in the Y direction, hold down Control, select, grab, Y direction, hold down Control, and now they're aligned vertically with each other and horizontally with each other. So now I have a nice square face. Oops, flip back to 3, select the face. Now I can scale that down. Maybe if I want to make a leg on a robot or something, I can do that. So that's very, very handy to do. So say another handy thing to do is if I'm in the top mode and I hit B or S, no, B for boundary select, and I box in a box, it selected all my faces, and I want to say scale all these or do something with them. You'll notice what it did is it didn't select these faces or the bottom faces. It only selected the faces that I could see. So a lot of times that's not what I want. I wanted to select all the faces throughout my whole mesh. So what I can do is I hit the Z key, and it pops up what shading view I'm in. Right now I'm in solid. I can go back to rendering mode to see how it will look like actually in Unity. This is rendered mode is what it's going to look like. I can go to wireframe mode. And what this does is it lets me see right through my object. It shows me dots where the center points of each face are. And now if I hit 7 to go to top mode, hit B for box, select it in, you notice it selected everything right all the way through my mesh. And depending on the size of my box and what oops, you notice it hadn't selected those side ones. So now it's selected everything in my mesh. Now I can go back to solid if I want to see it in that and scale it. And now it's going to grab and scale all my items. So switching to wireframe mode when selecting things can be very handy. So last thing we're going to do is talk about the center point of an object. And this is important when exporting to Unity. So I'm going to select this. Oops. Go to object mode, hit X, delete, Shift A, add back my cube. I'm going to scale this up just to get a little bigger. I'm going to go into wireframe mode. And you'll notice that there's this yellow dot. The yellow dot is the actual center point of the object. And this is going to be important when bringing something into Unity, because this is the point in Unity that when you insert an object into your scene, this is the point, the coordinate point that it uses. And maybe I want it in the center of the object, maybe I don't. There are times when I don't. And so what I can do is I can actually move that center point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my object in the Z direction. I'm going to go into side view mode so I can see exactly where the bottom of it is. Grab it in the Z direction. Now you'll notice this 3D cursor, right? So the 3D cursor is important again in this situation because I've selected this object. I can go to my object menu because I'm in object mode. This is important and this is confusing too. You'll notice that in edit mode, my object menu is not there. There's other menus that are available. If I go back to object mode, I can do certain commands in object mode that I can't do in edit mode, and changing the center point is one of those. So I go to object. You'll see there's an option set origin. I don't know what the shortcut key is. I don't do it a lot. I can change origin to 3D cursor. So you'll notice my dot moved down to where the 3D cursor was. And now the center point of this cube, as far as Unity is concerned, will be right underneath my cube. And we use this like when creating characters. If I want to create a guy walking around, I actually want his center point to be really at the center of his feet, not at the center of his body, because he's standing on things. And a lot of times if I'm making objects, I want the center point to be at the bottom of my object because I want my object, say, usually to be sitting on a plane. I don't want it to be halfway in the middle of a plane. So I want my 0 point of my object to be at the bottom of my object. So changing that center point by using this object menu is very important. So I know this is a lot. What I can tell you is that the more you work with Blender, the better you get at these things, and it really just takes practice. And it can be frustrating to watch someone modeling, or as I'm doing more modeling, to follow that and reproduce it yourself. Hopefully this video helps outline some of the basics. I don't know how well I did explaining these things, but hopefully it'll help you get through these frustrations and learn Blender better. But like I said, practice is how you get to know these things. And the more you use the shortcut keys, the better you're able to remember them. At least that's my experience. So I hope this helped, and I'll see you on the next video.